Hey, great people. Thank you for joining us. I am Chidi Akunna.
Victor Akunda.
If you're new to our channel, this is Foundation for Family Affairs. And at Foundation for Family Affairs, our mission is to connect hearts and raise healthy families. And that's why we're so excited about what we have to talk about today. We thought we'd drink from the wealth of experience of a psychologist who is very good at her craft. She knows what she's about, isn't she?
Absolutely.
So we'll be considering the subject of attachment styles. If you haven't heard about it, don't worry. She'll be telling us what it's about and the different types of it. So, attachment styles, forging better connection with your child. Hey, maybe up until now you have good connection with your child. How can we make it better? And we just thought, yes, it's an interview. You can watch it any time of the year, but more so during the Mother's Day weekend. So this is a gift to all of you mothers. Let's just watch and see what we can um, take from this to add to our what we're doing as mothers.
Absolutely.
How about that? Do you want to say something?
Yes. So I learned a lot from this. I've researched this topic, but someone said it is what you know after you know it all that counts. So there's a lot for you to learn. If you're a mother, if you're a parent, if you're a single parent, if you are a double parent, you have a lot to learn in this. So this talks about a lot about attachment style. How does it influence your parenting? Sometimes parenting, most of what we learned are all programmed at our subconscious level. So we're not even aware what is influencing our decisions and how we raise our children, how our upbringing, nurturing, and how our makeup, nature is impacting on how we are parenting. So this is a huge eye opener. All right. So I will strongly rather recommend you watch this and reflect on how you are parenting and see what you can improve to be able to raise a child that will have a secure attachment.
I think that's a good summary of the video. That's a good summary. So leave it at that, and make sure you watch till the end.
Yeah.
Yes, this one really short, so you can stay on it and gather as much juice from it as possible. We'll see you on the other side. Hey, we have the beautiful, pleasant Adesiyan, a great psychologist. But would let her introduce herself. Please do us the honors, Pleasant. Let's meet you. Who are you?
Hi everyone, I'm Pleasant. I'm a youth intensive psychological practitioner, specifically working in Tier 4 camps and adolescent mental health units.
Oh, great. So, in your practice, how do things work? Tell us a bit about what you do in your practice.
Yeah, so my day-to-day is basically working with young people who have been put underneath the Mental Health Act. So they've been sectioned and then they've been put in hospital. But then I also work with young people who have been discharged since then and are going back home, going back to placements, going back to their families. And I kind of help mitigate that experience of going from a ward back to living at home. So I do some work with families in trying to work through that. And then I do some one-to-one therapy work with some young people.
Awesome. Okay, so what we'll be talking about today, attachment styles. What's forging better connection with your child? Attachment style, forging better connection with your child. Now, before we dive into it, would you be kind to let us know what are attachment styles? What are they? And it'll be great if you told us the different types of attachment styles.
Yeah, so attachment was basically developed by this guy called Bowlby, and he found that during the first few years of an infant's life, they tend to have different attachment styles to their caregivers. And then another study was carried out by Mary Ainsworth, where we got the attachment styles, and they found that there were 4 different attachment styles in young children. So their study was like they would leave a young baby in a room, they would introduce a stranger, and the young baby's interaction with the stranger basically identified their attachment styles. We tend to have 4 attachment styles of secure attachment, insecure avoidant, insecure ambivalent, and then disorganized. So we're not really sure where the attachment types fit in, but we know it's like a disorganized attachment, so it might be everywhere. Yeah, so those are the 4 main ones that we use in our field of psychology.
Okay, so I'm sure our viewers have just heard that, and they're wondering what are
Mm.
these four attachment styles about? Can
Mm.
you just tell us briefly?
Yeah, so I would say when I see a young person with a secure attachment type, I would say it's a young person who's able to use their parents as a secure base. So, for example, if you go on holiday, your child might be distressed about that, but they're able to adequately express those feelings. So they might call you
Mm,
regularly or they'll send you a message saying, I miss you. But when I'm looking at young children with insecure avoidant or insecure ambivalent, what tends to happen is this young child misses their parents on holiday. So they could do one thing if they're avoidant is completely ignore their parents, pretend that their parents never existed and kind of go through those 2 weeks struggling on their own. Or if they're ambivalent, they tend to kick off. So you'll see a child calling their parents, destroying the house. So those are the two types of insecure attachment types that I would see. But if I see a young person who's disorganized, it's kind of unpredictable. So I'm not really sure. This could be a young person who could easily pretend that everything is going okay, that their parents have left the house. Or it could be a young person who kind of breaks down. So they kind of kick off at the house, break everything. And then when their parents return, they kind of reject them again. So it varies person to person, but most of the time, this is what I see within those attachment styles.
okay. When I hear you, I hear nurture, I hear nature.
Yeah.
So, do we inherit this, or is this something that we develop over a period of time? And what role do parents play in
Mm.
the type of attachment style that a child develops?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think in psychology, there's always this big debate about nurture versus nature. With attachment types, we tend to say it's a mixture of both. I think some young people are predisposed to certain
Mm,
illnesses or certain things, but at the same time, we know that the upbringing and the kind of attention and the kind of reciprocity that a young
fantastic.
person receives from their parents also plays a very big part. So if we have
Mm,
a parent who is consistently kind of mimicking, so we call this like mirroring. So if you have a baby and your baby is kind of laughing and you're kind of
mm,
mirroring in that back, those are kind of
mhm.
the initial foundational stages that we like to
Wow.
see. We like to see a parent who's mirroring what the child is saying, kind of talking
Mm,
that parent voice that we hear all the time, that high pitched
mm,
voice. Those kind of
mm.
moments play a very big part in attachment styles for sure.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now, this gives a lot of hope, but well, it gives a lot of hope in the sense that you can be intentional about designing the type of attachments that you want your child to have. Okay.
Mm,
It also creates some form of challenge because, for example, if a mother or a parent is very busy, not available, and is not present when that child is making some of those sounds, to be able to mirror it back, so what recommendation will you give to a parent like that that is
mm,
busy, not not just because of the nature, the phase of life they are at, they're
yeah,
unable to be there for the child, so they have to probably put the child up in a what they call it now, in a daycare or something.
yeah.
What advice will you give to such a mom? How
Mm.
can they still? Is this still possible for them to help a child to develop the secure attachment style? Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because we live in a society where we tend to have
Mm,
two parents who are working full time at that. An advice I would give to a mom is that go to work and do what you have to do. You still need to make a living, but during those moments that you do have with your child, it needs to be focused attention on that child. I think we tend to do this thing where we'll pick the baby up and then you drop the baby back down. Now you're choosing this moment to kind of look at your emails still or reply to that WhatsApp message or kind of watch that TV show. I think having that designated time with that baby and still
wow,
doing those one-to-one times is still important. So maybe it's like a nighttime routine. So you have a nighttime routine, stick to that and use that nighttime
wow,
routine as a way for you to bond. So like even if it's those small moments, it kind of makes a big difference.
wow,
I like that
wow.
you're making it practical.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, because at
That's
the end
real
of the day,
life.
yeah, that's real life. Because sometimes parents may feel overwhelmed. Have I
Yeah.
failed? Can I still do something? I can't take off, I can't go off, what do you call it now? I just had a baby. I can't
Mm.
go on, what do you call it now?
Maternity leave.
Maternity leave for the whole
Yeah.
9 months because
Yeah.
at some point the pay is not so encouraging. I need to, or maybe the person is new in the country, trying to settle in. So there are many balls that are all juggling all at once. We
Yeah.
have rent that is due. Single income is not enough for us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to be that parent who doesn't connect with the child, who behaves in a way that eventually limit the child in some developmental ways? How can I balance this? And so I like what you said in terms of creating some practical steps, what they can do now that you're around, engage with the child, create a form of routine. So the child knows that my mom is going to come at this time. My dad is going to come at this time. And then they can know that, that is really good. That's really good. What happens, whereby one parent is trying to do all the right things, and then another parent is kind of doing something that doesn't, that's more like distorts what this other parent is doing. So what kind of advice would you give in a situation like that?
Yeah, when I work with parents and I see one parent who has one style of communicating and then another parent who has another style of communicating, it becomes a really big problem, especially when the child tends to show preference for one. I think that number one needs to be a conversation with both parents, an agreed parenting style. Because one parent cannot be saying yes to this and then saying no. It's very confusing. But also when the two parents are communicating, I always tell people this, that you have two perspectives and either perspective is not wrong per se, but we need to be able to bring both perspectives together and have an agreement, especially for this child. And number one is like you want the best thing for your child, and you both obviously do want the best for your child. And one thing might be working better. So if you have a parent who's more of a disciplinarian, and then you have another parent who's very easygoing per se, I think it's very easy to say that the disciplinarian is doing something wrong and putting the blame on the disciplinarian or putting blame on the person who's easygoing. But rather than, we should kind of come to a common ground of, okay, your mum has said you can't go out today, and I hear that you're frustrated, but at the same time, I kind of agree with her, and I think maybe if we stay home to get today, and maybe the next time that you can go out with your friends, kind of coming to that middle ground, not saying that one is right or one is wrong, but both looking united in front of the children is the primary concern.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Okay.
A question I wanted
to ask. Go ahead.
Now, I know everyone would want to gravitate towards the secure style, right? What happens if you have a child who has quite matured, has developed to a certain extent, and probably that child falls under the avoidant or disorganized? What can you recommend in a case like that?
Yeah, so what I always say is that attachment style itself as a theory has been criticized, especially when we look at cultures like Nigerian cultures, or we look at cultures in Russia. If we measure their attachment style, not everyone's going to be secure. So some people will come out insecure just based on this idea of a collectivist and an individualist culture. But when we do have young people who show insecure attachment styles, that's like the age of 12, 13, I would say that it's still easy for us to teach these young people appropriate ways to regulate their emotions or appropriate ways to communicate. So if you have a young person who you see as having an insecure attachment type, let's say with their mum, and we tend to have these big blowouts about whether or not you're going to church today, whether or not I like what you're wearing, instead of there to be this continuous fight, I think what the parent should focus on doing is getting their child to communicate in an effective way, in a way that's not rude and in a way in which is acceptable in society. So if your child tends to have tantrums or tends to throw things, there needs to be a conversation about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And if you are angry, you need to be able to communicate that you're angry. And you being avoidant, I tell young people this all the time, if you don't tell someone that you're upset with them, they won't know. So if you throw something, I'm still not sure if you're upset with me or you're upset with the thing that you've thrown. You need to be able to tell me, articulate those words to me, that I'm upset with you right now, or mom, I didn't like what you have said. Maybe you're not in that way because, culturally it might not be acceptable, but finding a way to kind of explain to your parents or getting the child to learn how to communicate effectively will definitely change that. And even with attachment styles, as you grow older, I feel like as a parent, the relationship dynamic kind of changes. When you have a 12-year-old is very different to an 18-year-old. And the relationship that you have with an 18-year-old and a 12-year-old is very different. If you still have an 18-year-old that's avoidant, I think it's a telling to you to kind of change your approach. I mean, maybe coming from a different point of view, coming from that different perspective. If your child has locked themselves in their room for the past 12 days and you've tried knocking, banging, shouting, why don't you try sending a text? Why about you send a text to your child? Or how are you? I've seen that you've been in your room. I was kind of wondering if you're doing okay. So if we have those children with different attachment types that are showing insecure, I would say continue to do what you're doing and ensure that your child sees that you're validating, sees that you're hearing them. If it's not changing, try a different approach.
Brilliant. See, I'm enjoying what you're saying so much that my head is just going popcorn all over the place. Lovely, lovely, lovely. So one of the questions that I would like to ask you, sometimes, different parents have different expectations. You just mentioned earlier on that the way we interact with a child when they are 12 and 18 and an adult would definitely to change because the expectation will be changing. The expectation from the child towards the parent will also be changing. At some point, they need some form of independence. Sometimes some parents don't get the memo.
Hmm.
That's a different topic for another day. But the question I'd like to ask is, what happens in a situation whereby the parents are not really created that connection while the child is growing up? So the child is
Hmm.
now grown used to the mother or the dad not being around, and all of a sudden, oh, Mother's Day, and they're like, where are you going to send me the gift? But the child doesn't have that emotional connection with the mom or the dad. And so they're not really, really celebrating that special moment with them. What,
Hmm.
what will you say?
So just to add to that, because
Yes.
you talked about gifts, how about spending quality time?
Mm,
You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah. Yeah.
can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, yeah, I'll answer both. So, like, quality time plays a very big influence on to how later on they'll interact with you on events such as like Mother's Day. Quality time, people tend to get a bit confused about what quality time looks like. But a lot of the time, I say quality time is active listening time. So, if, for example, you've come back from church, you're both in, all sitting in the living room, this is the time for you to be curious. This is the time for you to ask your child, what did you learn in Sunday school today? This is not the time for you to, you might already know the answer, but it's not the time for you to grill or correct, or because that's going to ruin the whole idea of quality time. Your child doesn't want to spend time with you if all you're going to do is put them down or demoralize what they say. But instead, if you're acting curious, like, oh, you discussed Psalm 23, I've never heard about Psalm 23, tell me more, what did you learn? That curiosity allows the child to kind of want to tell you more. So when they're like 18 and you're being curious, oh, how was school today? They tell you things like da 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 da. Oh, I have a boyfriend, by the way, mum. That's how they kind of get to that point, because you've always been curious about their life, and it's not new to them when you ask questions. It's not an invasion of privacy. It's not mums being out of order that she's asking you all these questions. When you have quality time is when you actively listen to your child and you repeat back what they've said to you. I do this all the time with my parents. Like, so what I'm hearing you say is, or correct me if I'm wrong, especially if we're having like a very heated discussion. So correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing is, this is how you viewed this. So quality time is when you're showing active listening, when you're being curious with your child and you're not being passive during those moments. And you're also not trying to demoralize them or put them down or start an argument, because a lot of people can pose the argument that when you have disagreements with your child, it makes you grow up, and then they build these resilience to things. But at the same time, I feel like young people remember those moments. So they'll remember when mum told me that I wasn't good at maths, or I remember when I was doing maths with my dad and dad would always shout at me at the kitchen table. Those are memories that they kind of carry on with them. So when you do quality time, it should be things that are positive, things that show that you're really curious about their life and what they're really up to. And then that, moving on to the second part of the question about Mother's Day, when you have a young person who's had a very difficult relationship with their mother per se, like someone who's been their primary caregiver for such a long time, they're going to approach the holiday in two different ways. So you could have a young person who is very good at faking it, who would buy the presents, who would buy the card, but at the deep down they know that there's no value to that. They haven't put any sentimental value into it. They're buying these gifts because they know that mum is going to complain, or mum is going to call them 20 times because they haven't bought that gift. But at the same time, you also have a young person who is sad, who is withdrawn, and who chooses not to buy that gift for mum because they think mum doesn't deserve it, or why should I buy that gift for mum when mum was unable to be there for me in those very important moments. And one thing I say is that both ways are valid, because this is how the young person has chose to cope with the situation. But for a parent shouldn't be surprised if they get a gift that maybe isn't what they're up to when you weren't there for the child during those moments. Don't be surprised if you don't get the gift, because a young person who's had a very difficult relationship with their parents has a right to kind of cope with the situation the best way they can. But I think sometimes as parents, or as Christian parents, we have this automatic thought that we are deserving of everything, but being a Christian doesn't make you a good parent. So, we also have to balance those two ideas. Yeah.
Thank you very much for shedding light, and thank you for that example. I just love that you shared that. But as you were speaking, I was just thinking, in a case like that, What would you advise a parent who is truly bothered about it to do? Say a parent who is thinking, actually, I think I see this reaction in my children. So are you saying that's it? That's it for that relationship? How can that relationship be restored? How can they have better connection?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think the first thing I would ask that parent is, are you upset because of Mother's Day and you didn't receive a gift? Or are you upset because you don't have a good relationship with your children? And that's the first question I have to ask, because if it's about a gift, then we've got a lot more work to do. But if it's about the fact that you don't have a good relationship with your kids, and then we can start working there. And what about the relationship is not good? Is it the way you communicate? Is it the fact that you don't speak to each other? Is it the fact that every time you do speak to each other, it's just anger and there's just a lot of miscommunication? And if we're working with difficulties in relationships, then I always recommend going to a counselor, a therapist, going to someone who understands both perspectives, because I don't want a parent to automatically think that because you're now going to a therapist or a counselor, that the counselor is going to take their side. Because I think parents automatically assume, because this is, you correct me if I'm wrong, that because they've given a child the necessary things like a house, a home, and food, they've met all the basic needs of a child. And that's not all the basic needs of a child. A child needs someone who's emotionally stable. So when you have a child who's going through puberty, who's going through those ups and downs, a parent is meant to be like this and is dealing with that emotional roller coaster of that child. So if you do go to therapy and you do seek out help, don't expect the therapist to validate everything in which you feel as a parent. And you can acknowledge that as a parent, you've tried really hard and your child still struggles with the fact that despite that you've worked hard, you still weren't the best parent that they could possibly have. And at the same time, when you go to therapy, it's about sincerity, that I am here because I want a better relationship with you. I'm here because I love you as a mother and I want to see you more. I want to speak to you more. I want to know you as a person, as a human being, not because as a mother I deserve to know who you are, but as a mother I want to know who you are. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that does make a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I like the way you try to balance it, by first of all, dissecting what the issue might be and then giving practical recommendation of what people can do. Okay,
Yeah.
so for new parents, children, people just have their first baby, for example. What advice will you give to them to ensure that their own attachment style does not create maybe a disorganized attachment style? So if I have a disorganized attachment style, how do I ensure that I don't pass it on to my child?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First thing is being a parent who acknowledges that they're going to make mistakes. So if you do make mistakes, it's not the end of the world that your child is now going to automatically be disorganized in their attachment style. But also be a parent who is open to own up to those mistakes to their child. So like if you've had an argument with your child, or as a baby or a toddler they've done something wrong and you've raised your voice out of anger, not because you're trying to discipline but because you're just purely angry, being able to communicate with that child that, oh, mum was angry and mum's sorry for shouting, because usually mum wouldn't shout like that. So being able to own up to those mistakes to your child as well, and share that your child that this is how you react to things in your life. When you do insult someone, you kind of apologize back. So starting from a very young age, modeling the behavior that you expect your child to show. So if you expect your child to be respectful to adults, you are also respectful to your child. So you respect your child's boundaries sometimes. When the child says, no, mum, I don't want to be on camera today, you kind of respect that. You start from a very young age. But also being a parent who's able to take time out of their day to spend time with their kids. And I think we've talked about this before, about quality time. We live in a day and age in society where we're all working 9 to 5s, which is basically like a 7 to 7. But even in those 7 to 7 hours where you're drained and you're absolutely tired, that you come home and in that tiredness, you still seek out your child. You still seek out to have those tender moments with them. And you kind of connect one-to-one on that one-to-one basis, being interested in your child's life. What sports are they doing at school? The amount of parents that I've spoken to, they don't know what sport their child plays. They don't know if their child is good at music. They don't know if their child reads books in their spare time. finding out the hobbies that your child has is such a good way to kind of get into their life. They'll go and tell their parents, oh my gosh, mum asked me about my favorite book the other day. Guess what? We're going to go and buy books together. Just starting on those little things and building up, but primarily just being a parent who puts God at the center of the relationship with their children. The one thing that my parents always did was like, if you can't come to us, you can go to God. So being a parent who always preaches the gospel to their child, emphasizes the importance of Jesus, saying that if you can't speak to me, how about you pray and see what God says? So those are some of the few tips that I have.
Wow. Man, completely blown away, blown away. There's a body of knowledge around this. And I think we need to make a lot of noise about it. And I don't think this is the last time we're going to be inviting you.
Yeah.
We need to make a lot of noise about it, particularly in our community. You know, there are a lot that parents really need to learn. How does culture play a role in the attachment style? I like what you said in terms of some criticism around attachment style, in terms of the different culture can impact it as well. We didn't quite touch on that, but looking at how the different attachment style, our parenting style, how does that impact our own attachment style? How does that play a role in our role as a mom? And they need to, now that we're going to be having Mother's Day around the corner, you know, I don't think we have any perfect mother anyway. But embracing your own fault and say, okay, I think it's also an opportunity to reflect, to say, what type of a mom have I been? And what type of a mom do I want to be going forward?
Yeah.
In the next 5 years, what type of a mom do I need to be? And who do I need to become to be able to, become that type of a mom? What do I need to do to become that type of a mom? And what type of a mom will my child, the type of child I want to raise, what type of a mom do they need? And how can I become that type of a mom? So I think it calls for reflection, and then looking at what we have done well and what we can do better. And don't dismiss the feedback from your children, because sometimes children give us feedback and say, who are you to tell me what to do? So if you don't ask for feedback, if you don't want to hear it, sometimes parents say, how type of mom have I been? And the look they are giving, how dare you say? So the child knows that mom can't take this feedback, so the child edits what the child is going to say. Let's ask for a sincere feedback and get that feedback and really go to God, like you said, how can we improve? And if we need therapy, go for therapy. Therapy is not for the weak, it's for the strong. It's for those who know that they need help. Those are the people that actually are the strong people. That's mine.
Wow, it's just been awesome hearing you touch on these, you were saying, and I like that it made it really practical.
Yes.
Because it's something. I mean, as a mom, I can see myself through what you have said. So it's just for us to do the reviews that you were talking about. So thank you so much for coming on.
Another thing I want to ask you is, do you have your own Instagram? How can people find you? Do you have the book, something?
And at the same time, give us your final words.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. If people are really interested in the things, psychology that I speak about, I have an Instagram called Melanin Mind Psychology, where I kind of discuss psychology as a whole, kind of DBT skills and just mental health stigma in the African community. But my ending words for Mother's Day that's coming up soon is just to enjoy the moments with your children and remember this in years to come as an amazing event that you had with them, and just build those amazing memories. And if your children aren't there with you, I think it's the perfect time for us to reflect on what we've done well, but what we can also do better, because there's always something we can do better. But always just praying for everyone's families and just God to just mend those families that are really struggling right now. But yeah, those are just some of my ending words. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Her details will be in the description box. So please just hit the description box and you'll be able to connect with her. Thank you so much for coming on. Until the next time, we'll see you in the next one.
Next one. Bye for now.
Bye.